Please allow me to speak briefly about the lecture series that this program is part of and to pay tribute to the person whose memory it is meant to honor. As I mentioned, tonight's talk is the third in an annual lecture series named in memory of Howard Jay Reiter, a beloved member of the Katz Center's advisory board and its family. Howard passed away on September 4th, 2021, and his absence continues to be keenly felt by all who had the opportunity to know and interact with him, and his legacy continues to radiate in many ways. Howard Reiter was educated at Princeton University and at MIT with degrees in mechanical and aerospace engineering, and he went on to become an inventor of a multitude of United States and foreign patents. That success was not outmatched by wonderful human qualities that included a love of his family and community, optimism, insatiable curiosity, and a generous spirit that led him to engage in multiple philanthropic endeavors, including his role as a leader and supporter of the Katz Center. We are very grateful to the many family and friends of Howard who made it possible for the Katz Center to pay tribute to his love of learning and deep engagement in Israeli society, and we're honored to have his wife, Jody, with us tonight. I also wanted to take a moment to thank the staff of the Arthur Ross Gallery for kindly allowing us to hold our lecture here this evening. As you can see, we're in a room with a very special exhibition entitled After Modernism, Selections from the Newman Family Collection, which is drawn from a collection of collection belonging to a Jewish American Penn alumnus with roots in Hungary, Chicago, and New York City. Last but not least, I want to thank the Katz Center staff, especially Diana Dennis Walters, Marcy Cedar, Ann Albert, Katie Maxwell, Natalie Dorman, in fact, all the staff members of the Katz Center who make everything the Katz Center does possible. The purpose of the Reiter series is to share Israeli scholarship with the Penn community. And I will acknowledge that when we established it 4 or 5 years ago, we did not intend it necessarily to address current events. The goal was simply to share research from and about Israel with the university community. That, in a way, remains a goal, but it so happens, as I think everybody here knows, that Israel has been in the headlines practically every single day for the last year and a half. And we realized that the series could be a helpful way to offer insight into what is happening within Israeli society that goes deeper than one can read about in the newspaper. Our focus today is how October 7th is being remembered in Israeli society, or how that memory is taking shape in Israeli society. And I myself got an extremely intense glimpse of that process last summer when I accompanied an anthropologist friend to Kfar Aza, one of the kibbutz communities that was attacked on October 7th and lost some 63 people. Although a few kibbutz members live there now, parts of it had been converted into a memorial for the 62 residents that were killed there. And there are hallmarks of a memorial. There are posters of the murdered and the kidnapped, and a dining hall that has been converted into an impromptu museum of broken furniture, twisted bicycles, and burned books and games. The most unforgettable moment in that brief tour was a recording that was playing continuously on a laptop in one of the kibbutz's apartments, where the mother of one of the young women killed on that day recorded herself in real time going through the ruins of her daughter's apartment. And the single most searing moment of the entire experience was when the mother in the video opens a drawer and discovers a book that her daughter was reading at the time she was killed, Judy Blume's It's Not the End of the World. What made this memorial unlike any other memorial I've ever visited was that the trauma it was commemorating was still ongoing. It was unfinished. It was too raw. It was too unprocessed. And the events of October 7th were not over yet. The apartment I just mentioned wasn't really a museum. It was a crime scene. There were still hostages in Israel's war. The war itself was still ongoing in Gaza, less than 2 miles away. The kibbutz members wanted their lost family members and friends to be remembered, but that memory had not settled into place. The events, as remembered by kibbutz members, was different from that of the government and from others in Israeli society. It was an experience, a memory that the mind just simply could not assimilate yet. And so this is why I'm so grateful, among other reasons, for the chance to learn from our speaker tonight, Israel's preeminent scholar of collective memory, who will be speaking about how October 7th is being remembered in Israel today. Professor Vinitzky-Seroussi is a sociologist in the Hebrew University's Department of Sociology and Anthropology. At the university, she's played a number of very important leadership roles, including serving as Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences and serving as the Director of the Harry S. Truman Institute for the Advancement of Peace. Her research encompasses various topics, many connecting to collective memory, ranging from the kind of anthropology of high school reunions to how COVID and other pandemics are remembered. And her publications have been abundant and rich, including a book about Yitzhak Rabin's assassination and the dilemmas of memory, and an edited volume entitled The Collective Memory Reader. As I've also learned over the last 24 hours, she's also a very delightful person and really, really interesting to talk to. So as I said, she'll be focusing tonight on the collective memory on October 7th. We'll have time for questions after her presentation. I want to thank you all for coming, and it's my pleasure now to welcome Dr. Seroussi.
Thank you, Steve, for this nice and generous introduction, and thank you for coming. And I'm honored to be the Howard Jay Reiter Memorial Lecture this year, and thank you for having me. I don't take any of this for granted. Okay. On October 7, this is the WhatsApp I'm getting from my husband. I woke up in Chicago. When I turned on my cell phone in my hotel room on my way to give a lecture, I was overwhelmed by over 100 WhatsApp messages bearing unimaginable news. We are in a war, my spouse wrote. Hamas has occupied kibbutzim and kidnapped civilians. This is 4 times Yom Kippur War, referring to a collective trauma shared by my generation, his generation. We're in unprecedented war, echoed messages from dozens of family members and friends. 3 hours later, I found myself seated with a remarkable scholar who had fled from Rwanda to the United States. As we discussed her vision for commemorating the genocide in her own country, a mission profoundly personal to her as a child of a Hutu father and a Tutsi mother, my attention waved between our conversation and the devastating news unfold on CNN in that Chicago living room. The television broadcast scenes that appeared extracted from a dystopian film, a story that continues to unfold to this day. My remaining time in the United States transformed into an urgent mission, securing a flight home and buying many phone chargers for friends and colleagues who had given their personal devices to their sons and daughters who were called to reserve service. During these chaotic days, Israeli civil society demonstrated remarkable resilience and unity while the state failed us. October 7th represents a pivotal moment in Israeli history and likely marks a watershed for Jewish communities worldwide. That day shattered our fundamental assumptions about security and safety as civilians found themselves violated, deserted, and abandoned, calling for help that never arrived. While my focus today is not just on October 7 itself, but rather on its memory, we must acknowledge both the initial catastrophe and the ongoing trauma. The months that have followed, and numerous hostages, civilians and soldiers, men and women, young and old, still held in Gaza, and a continuous war present an experience that defies comprehension and challenges our capacity for commemoration. October 7th presents a distinct challenge for collective memory in Israel, exemplifying what my scholar here defined, Professor Robin Wagner-Pacifici, difficult past. Difficult past are not necessarily defined by their level of tragedy, but rather by the presence of moral trauma, dispute, tension, conflict, and shame, elements that provoke a profound discomfort and embarrassment within society. The same historical event can be tragic for one society while difficult for another. The Holocaust is probably a paradigmatic example. It represents a profound tragedy for Jews and other victims of Nazi Germany, while constituting a difficult past for Germany to process. This duality is powerfully illustrated by the Memorial to the Murdered Jews of Europe in central Berlin, a project that required decades of public discourse, design deliberations, and national soul-searching before its eventual inauguration in 2005. Similarly, October 7, this is the map of the Gaza Strip and what we call the Gaza envelope. And as you can see, it's about an hour drive to Tel Aviv. Similarly, October 7 is tragic for many Israelis. First and foremost, for residents of the Gaza envelope, what we call Otef Aza, who lost their loved ones, their homes, their communities, and much more. For the government, however, it presents a difficult past, and for the army as well. Despite attempts to deny responsibility for the catastrophe, questions of the accountability persist. This tension manifests in the government's limited initiation of commemorative activities and the emergence of alternative ceremonies and memorial sites. Even questions such as naming of the war and the distinction between October 7 and the subsequent conflict remains contested. In analyzing a societal response to events that constitute difficult past, we can identify three distinct approaches to commemoration. The first of these is the multivocal model, which finds its exemplar in the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. The memorial, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, enable in creating a shared space that can accommodate diverse and often conflicting perspective on the Vietnam War. The second model disappeared, the second model. Anyway, the second model, trust me, there is one, of commemorating difficult past emerged from Israel's experience with the 1995 assassination of Prime Minister and Defense Minister Yitzhak Rabin. This case exemplifies what we term fragmented commemoration, where multiple commemorative practice occupy distinct times and spaces, each addressing different audience with varying interpretations of historical events. In Rabin's case, this fragmentation manifests physically through two primary memorial sites, the state-sanctioned gravesite in Jerusalem, which represent official remembrance, and the monument at the assassination site in Tel Aviv, which has evolved into a political shrine associated with Israel's Zionist left. The temporal dimension of commemoration is similarly divided. Official national ceremonies occur on the Hebrew date of the 12th of Cheshvan, while political commemoration takes place on the Gregorian date of November 4. The third model of addressing difficult past emerged from South Africa's approach to commemorating the apartheid era. This represents what we term consensual commemoration, where certain aspects of the past are deliberately set aside to facilitate social cohesion in the present. The Apartheid Museum in Johannesburg exemplified this approach. It constructed a carefully curated narrative that prioritized building a shared vision for South Africa's present and future, rather than engaging with potentially divisive historical details that might bother certain parts of the society. Beyond examining the emerging form of commemorating under difficult circumstances, we must address a more fundamental question that applies to all social memory, whether it stems from traumatic events or from moments of collective pride and glory. What does it take to be remembered? This question will inform the remainder of my talk today. I will return to October 7th before we depart and to some thoughts I have around it and about its commemoration. When we see, here we have the rabbin, two different sites and two different dates. When we see this image of Rosa Parks from Montgomery, Alabama in 1955, we recognize an iconic moment in American civil rights history, her refusal to give up her bus seat to a white man. This act of resistance has become emblematic of the entire civil rights movement, preserved in our collective memory as a pivotal moment of change. Yet, Parks was not the first to take such a brave stand. What makes her story particularly instructive for our understanding of collective memory is that while others had performed similar and other acts of resistance, it is Parks who became fixed in our national consciousness. Anne Frank symbolizes more than any other individual the immensely tragedy of the Holocaust and its victims. While 6 million Jewish lives were lost, a number almost impossible for the human mind to comprehend, it is Anne Frank's name and story that have become embedded in global consciousness. When people worldwide are asked to name a single person associated with the Holocaust, Anne Frank is invariably the most frequent response. This phenomena raises a crucial question for our understanding of collective memory. So what does it take to be remembered? In today's talk, I will present 5 key dimensions that I believe are essential for sustaining social memory: time, space, agency, institutionalization, and culture. The first dimension is time. If a society wishes to preserve something in its collective memory, one of the most powerful ways to do so is by marking it on the national calendar, by establishing an official Memorial Day. When a state chooses to commemorate a specific event or individual in this way, it sends a clear message that this is important to us, this matters. However, when I refer to a Memorial Day, I'm not speaking about the American model, no offense, where the occasion is often translated to a day of shopping or leisure or getting married. A meaningful Memorial Day is strategically placed during the school year, not on a weekend or during the summer when the future citizens are far removed from school ceremonies. It is in these circumstances and ceremonies within the structure of the educational system that stories are told, knowledge is shared, and identities are constructed. Anchoring Memorial Day in a national calendar activate multiply societal systems in Israel. The media prepares special programs, the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, hold special sessions, and formal state ceremonies are held. Yet perhaps more significant is what takes place within the educational system. On these days, students are asked to attend school wearing a white shirt. It can be a t-shirt, but it has to be white. Now, wearing a white shirt has become a symbol of special occasions and ceremonies, and it reflects one of the colors of the national flag. While it's not mandatory, many teachers also wear a white shirt on that day, reinforcing a collective sense of unity. However, what often happens the night before is just as significant. Many Israeli parents are familiar with the common scenario. At 8 or 9 p.m., never earlier, a child suddenly remembers I need a white shirt for tomorrow. This last-minute realization often leads to frustration. Why do you always remember at the last moment? And the ensuing rush to find a clean shirt. Yet something much deeper unfolds in these moments. As parents respond to the question, why do you need a white shirt for tomorrow? They often share personal stories, stories of loved ones lost in wars, terrorist attacks, the Holocaust. In this way, a connection is made between the National Memorial Day and the individual family histories. The family and the nation become intertwined, united in remembrance. Additionally, many schools' hours are dedicated to prepare for these ceremonies. What does it mean for collective memory? Memorial Day not only serve as a tribute to the dead, but they also offer time that can be shared, a time that can bring together diverse groups, even if just for a moment. In Israel, we have several official Memorial Days, two of which even feature a moment of silence marked by a siren, one for the Holocaust and one for the fallen soldiers and victims of terrorist attack. The significance of controlling the body from an early age cannot be overstated. Each year, I ask my students in my collective memory class, who among you stands still where you are alone, without anybody watching when the memorial siren sounds, when you're home? With the exception of very, very few, we all do, they answer. We all stand still. Over the years, they have disciplined both their bodies and their souls to the point that where this response becomes automatic. In fact, nearly all of my Jewish students are puzzled even by my question. Memorial Days are about conveying a message, which memories we choose to embrace and which we reject, and what kind of stories we want to be inspired by. This context helps explain the political battle in the United States over including Martin Luther King Jr. birthday in the national calendar. The battle is not just about honoring an important leader, but about the place and history of African American within the broader collective memory of the United States. The second dimension is space. Just as with time, if we want something to be remembered, it is crucial to dedicate a special visible space for it in the public sphere. This could be a monument, a central square, a site of where an important speech was made, like the Gettysburg a cemetery, or a place where significant event took place, such as where the blood was spilled, like Auschwitz. These spaces became locations people can pilgrimage to, where they can gather, hold ceremonies, or even protest. Those special spaces that often become sacred can provide a sense of community and meaning. In addition to the idea we've already discussed where a mnemonic space can be divided so that contentious publics do not interact, a key component in designing such space is its location. Is it centrally located and easily accessible, or is it in the periphery, difficult to reach? However, here you can see the Weitzman home in Rehovot, whom I think you guys know. Even as a central space in the heart of the capital doesn't guarantee its endurance in public ceremony. It still requires ongoing promotion, being marketed, consider a preferred site for school fields, trips, birthright journeys, and so on. Some memorials can easily be overlooked. For example, think of the various monuments scattered along highway that are scarcely noticed or understood as we drive by. A poignant case is the Weizmann House in Rehovot in the Weizmann Institute. This beautiful historic home designed by Erich Mendelssohn remains largely ignored and has essentially been erased from the public consciousness. Both the house and its original occupant, the first president of Israel, vanishing from the collective heart, mind, and mnemonic maps. Another important consideration when it comes to a mnemonic space is its character, as it can influence the type of rituals and ceremonies that can take place around it. The behavior that is acceptable around the monument in the center of the town is very different from what is appropriate in a cemetery or in a museum. There are codes of conduct still in place, though who knows for how long, that govern behavior in certain spaces. For example, we can scream, protest, and demonstrate in center of town, but such action would be inappropriate in a museum or a cemetery where a different sense of reverence and respect is required. If you were to push me really hard and ask me to choose between the two, what is more important for maintaining memory, where to invest, I choose time over space. Despite the compelling sense of authenticity and the power of saying, here in this place, I would give up the space and opt for time. Time is more abstract, yet it can be brought to any place. Unlike physical spaces, time doesn't require travel or significant expense, like the trips to Poland or Germany. We can synchronize an entire nation, regardless of its size, to hear a siren at the same moment and stand still. While COVID years and technological advancement have made distant places more accessible, it still isn't the same as experiencing time as collective. The third element is agency. Behind every act of commemoration are people who care deeply about a specific past and hold the necessary skills and resources to fulfill their mission. This can include architects, poets, municipal employees responsible for commemoration, educators, ministers of education, and in some countries, even ministers of history, members of parliament, and increasingly, film directors and producers of television series. Once we graduate from high school, unless we pursue a history major in college, most of our knowledge and understanding of the past comes from films and television shows we watch. Therefore, we must pay close attention to those responsible for producing this kind of public and popular culture, as well as their impact of the work. This production shape collective memory and influence how we understand and relate to the past, making them a powerful force in shaping public consciousness. Let's look at a few examples. Most of the world knows something about the Holocaust because they watch Spielberg's Schindler's List. The fact that we know how significant Jackie Kennedy was in the days following her husband's assassination, particularly in shaping his legacy by making key decisions about his burial site, is thanks to Pablo Larraín's 2016 film Jackie. What would we know about the 1965 Selma to Montgomery March led by Martin Luther King, if not for Ava DuVernay's film Selma? What we would know about Robert Oppenheimer, the Manhattan Project, and the creation of the atomic bomb, if not for Christian Nolan's film Oppenheimer. Israel has its own share of cinematic contribution to this cultural discourse. A recent example is Avi Nesher 2021 film, The Image of Victory, which tells the controversial and largely forgotten story of the Battle of Kibbutz Nitzanim in 1948. The film not only brought attention to this battle from both the Egyptian and the Israeli perspective, a significant act in itself, but perhaps more importantly, it gave voice to the former member of Kibbutz Nitzanim who had long felt neglected, shamed, and abandoned by the state and its leaders. All agents of memory seek to ensure that we remember certain things and forget others, but only some have the power and right capital to shape the narrative in their favor and maintain it over time. The fourth dimension are the institutionalization of the memory. Maintaining collective memory solely through volunteers is extremely, extremely difficult. Memory requires institutions, ones that are durable, persistent, and supported by steady budget and established traditions as individuals get tired and grow old. Institutionalization of memory can take many forms. One key method is legislation, such as memory laws that are actively enforced, not just the dead somewhere. As we all know, it's not enough to have laws in the books if they're just there. Another effective way to preserve the past is through museums, which have become increasingly popular, especially when they are high-tech and interactive. However, the museum comes with a hefty price tag, both for construction and ongoing maintenance. Consider two relatively recent examples of highly successful and important museums. The Jewish Museum in Warsaw, which you can see right here, and the Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. It's probably no coincidence that the latter museum was opened after a century of debate, completed and opened during the presidency of the first African-American president, Barack Obama. Finally, the painful history of African-American found a home, a national home. The fifth dimension is culture, the culture of the commemorating society. Societies are never monolithic. They are complex and multifaceted. However, there are certain themes that align more closely with society ethos, convention, culture, and overall texture. It is incredibly challenging to commemorate or preserve a memory that is incongruent with this cultural foundation. And here I quote you again, Robin. Let me use the example of this building to make my point. This is especially clear when we look at this example here in Philadelphia, not that far from your Independence Hall. In this building, I want to ask you if any of you know this building? Pardon me?
Looks like the one at the
No, but I can assure you that most Israelis don't know what this building is. That's correct. Now, this building located on 16 Rothschild Boulevard in Tel Aviv, David Ben-Gurion, the founding father of the Israeli state, declared its independence in 1948 when the British left. Here he read aloud the Israeli Declaration of Independence. This hall, as modest as it is, transfers a moment larger than life, a moment of true exaltedness, of greatness, a very national moment, a very secular moment, something unforgettable, declaring national independence after 2,000 years of Jewish life in the diaspora, 3 short years after the Holocaust, in a place that is considered homeland. Zion, finally, and indeed the establishment of the state was and is still mentioned by Jewish citizens as the most important event. But for decades, and still now, when one strolls in the fancy Rothschild Boulevard and stare at the building, all one can see is one of the most neglected buildings in the area. If one would make the effort and enter the building, one could find enthusiastic guide, but a totally unattractive, abandoned, dusty hall. The famous sentence said by Ben-Gurion, "We thereby declare," could be easily replaced with "we thereby neglect." Now we are talking about a super central place, center of Tel Aviv, easy to reach, and more important, a building in which the state was born. Moreover, Israel is very busy with nation building and with the world recognition in its right to exist, and it's committed to collective memory and commemoration and invest in it in ways that are pretty amazing compared to other nation states. In fact, I would argue that commemoration is an integral part of Israel's cultural fabric. It's intimate grammar, to borrow a term from the author David Grossman. So how is that the very place of Israel's birth has been left behind? This paradox leads me to a crucial issue: the relationship between the act of commemoration and the culture of the society doing the commemoration. The success of commemoration often depends on the right fit between what is being remembered and the ethos of the society that commemorates it. To put it bluntly, the theme of Independence Hall contradicts one of the central organizing principles of Jewish society in Israel, the principle of death and its commemoration. In other words, no one died in this building, and it is not tied to any war or significant loss. In Israel Jewish culture, this disconnect makes it, to say the least, a poor fit for the kind of commemoration that resonates deeply with the public. For the past 8 years, the building has been under construction, and I'm eager to see what the final result will be. In the meantime, it's clear that no one is in a rush to complete the renovations. To complicate matters further, the Independence Scroll, read by Ben-Gurion and signed in that building on that historic day, has over the past 2 years become symbolically linked with the protest against the right-wing government efforts to overhaul Israel's judicial system. The second example of my thesis takes us to the Israeli national calendar. Okay, those are the Hebrew dates, the Jewish holidays, the national new holidays. Let's take a brief look at the calendar. A calendar established when the State of Israel was founded in 1948. Initially, the state nationalized the Jewish calendar and then introduced 9 new holidays. 7 of these 9 holidays are memorial days, dedicated either to collective remembrance, such as the Holocaust, or for individuals, such as Yitzhak Rabin and David Ben-Gurion and Menachem Begin. The other 2 days, while not strictly memorial, are still deeply intertwined with memorial ceremonies. Independence Day, for example, is celebrated immediately after Memorial Day for the fallen soldiers, the day after. In fact, it begins with a memorial ceremony that transitions into a festive event. Similarly, Jerusalem Day, which has originally meant to be a joyous occasion celebrating the unification of Jerusalem, always include in the middle of the day a major memorial ceremony at Ammunition Hill in Jerusalem to honor the soldiers who fell in the 1967 battle for the city. I won't delve into the complexities of this idea and how the Palestinian citizens of Jerusalem perceive the unification of the city. In the United States, Memorial Day for American presidents, whether they were assassinated like Lincoln or Kennedy, or simply passed away, are never observed on the date of their death, never. Instead, they are always on or around their birthday. Israel, however, would never mark a day based on someone's birthday. Even in the case of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin's assassination, the debate over when to mark his Memorial Day is centered on whether to observe it on November 4th, the Gregorian date of his death, or on Yud Bet Cheshvan, which is the corresponding Hebrew date. Distancing the date from the traumatic event was never considered as an option, even though Rabin's biography offers other, less emotionally charged dates that could have been used for commemoration. In Israel, commemorating death always takes precedence over celebrating life, regardless of the emotional toll it may carry. This holds true even when young children are involved in marking the occasion. When Mother's Day was initiated by the Ministry of Education, later to be replaced by Family Day, the date chosen was the death date of Henrietta Sold. Sold, one of the most influential figures in Zionist history, is remembered for founding Hadassah, the women's Zionist organization in the USA, and for leading youth aliyah during the 30s, helping Jewish children escape Nazi Germany and immigrate to Palestine. So what did it take to be remembered? Collective memory and commemoration require time, space, effective agents of memory, institutional infrastructure, and content that resonate with and reflect the values of the commemorating society. Anne Frank and Rosa Parks had all of these elements, and as a result, they remain central to our collective memory of the 20th century. In fact, Anne Frank's legacy has been reinvented in recent years with platforms like Instagram, helping to tell the story of Eva, whose experience mirrors Anne's through diaries and similar narratives, enabling younger generation to connect with and learn about the Holocaust in a more personal and relevant to their own life contemporary way. Equally important is the idea that collective memory is dynamic. It is not static and can be reshaped over time. It's not enough to simply design, invest in, and erect a monument, then assume it will carry the memory for us. It may, but it may not. Similarly, events or individuals that were once considered insignificant or controversial can acquire new importance and even charisma over time. Take, for example, the transformation of Abraham Lincoln, and here I quote my colleague Barry Schwartz, who worked on that. In 1985, at the time of his assassination, Lincoln was a controversial figure, barely having won the recent election. Yet by 1914, just 60 years later, on the eve of World War I, he had become a unifying, beloved father of the American nation, so much so that he almost replaced George Washington, the founding father, as the most admired American politician. When we track these changes, we realize that collective memory can change without any alteration to the subject's biography. In Lincoln's case, his life and actions remain the same, but something in American society has changed. It took 60 years after his assassination for the country to seek inspiration as it prepared to send its soldiers to fight in World War I. In this search for unity and inspiration, America found that figure in Lincoln. This kind of transformation could also happen with figures like Yitzhak Rabin. Not now, not yet, but it's possible in the future. Take a look at what happened to this guy, Alexander Hamilton. Thanks to a talented playwright named Lin-Manuel Miranda and the massively successful Broadway musical Hamilton, which was so popular that until COVID-19, tickets were nearly impossible to get, or you had to sell something in order to get one, Hamilton's story became widely known. Both Miranda's musical, how many people outside the small circle of American history experts knew anything about Hamilton? Who knew his name outside this country? Now, thanks to Miranda, Hamilton's story is known not only in America, but around the world, along with the lucky tourists who managed to secure tickets. This musical, most famous and meaningful songs encapsulate a key idea: who lives, who dies, who tells our story. In Hamilton's case, Miranda was the one who could hold it. He was his most influential agent of memory. Similarly, Prince Charles owes much of his recent reputation shift to the success of the television series The Crown. The show helped reshape his public image, especially after the difficult years spent at boarding school and the cold relationship with his mother, the Queen. Through the series, Charles gained some sympathy, if not full compassion. But what does this say about the memory of Queen Elizabeth herself? How does the crown affect how we remember her legacy? The memory of the Holocaust in Israel has evolved significantly since the 50s. Initially, the focus was on heroic narrative, like those surrounding the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. However, following the Eichmann trial in 1961 and the haunting images of Israeli prisoners of war in Egypt and Syria in 1973, images that bore striking resemblance to the Holocaust photograph, the national memory of Holocaust began to shift from an emphasis on military resistance as the sole definition of heroism to a more inclusive understanding, one that acknowledges the courage in mere survival, maintaining moral integrity even in the face of life-threatening challenges, and acts of humanity such as sharing the last piece of bread with a hungry stranger. The historical reality of the Holocaust itself hasn't changed, of course, but Israel has changed. Some would say matured, and with it, the way heroism is defined and understood. This shift was evident in the way Israelis responded to the massacre of October 7, where even the simple, not so simple, act of holding the door handle of the safe room in Otef Aza in the south was considered as an act of heroism, and rightly so. The change in collective memory is shaped by time, space, agency, institution, and culture. These factors are crucial because they determine how memory is constructed, maintained, and how it can change over time. But social conditions evolve, and memory agents rise or fall in influence, and spaces that once held little significance can acquire new meanings. This fluidity is critical for understanding how collective memory operates and how it transforms in response to shifting culture, social, and political forces. Building and maintaining memory is much like any other important relationship. It requires constant investment. As we all know, there is very little in life that we can control, but we can certainly increase the chances that a particular story, person, or aspect of the past that matter to us will leave a voice and lasting something. So how will we remember October 7? The tragedy, the cruelness, the desertion, the heroism? How will we remember the war that followed? Will the war overshadow October 7? It is clear that for many, this past is a tragic one. For some powerful politicians and seniors in the army, it is a difficult one. The commemoration that will emerge from the ashes of October 7 and the war is not final, not only because the events are still ongoing, but because commemoration itself is a continuous process. We are already witnessing initiatives both from the below, what we call bottom up, and from above, top down. Here are some examples. One notable initiative is Edut 710, Testimony 710, a project dedicated to recording and preserving the testimonies of those who endure the devastating October 7 attacks. Formed by a collective of volunteers, this project brings together leading filmmakers, the most leading filmmakers in Israel, historians, archivists, and mental health professionals. Its goal is to create a video testimony database, ensuring that the personal stories and experiences of survivors are preserved for future generations while adhering to the highest ethical, legal, and technical standards. To date, over 500 testimonies have been collected, with many more to come. Another initiative is involved the adaptation of the project Memory in the Living Room format, a platform that originally developed for Holocaust remembrance. This format creates intimate spaces where October 7 survivors can share their experience. This project is supported by healthcare professionals and the NGO that manages the original Memory in the Living Room project. The photo that you can see here is one documented the event that took place in my own home, which hosted such event along with 180 other living rooms all over Israel that opened their hearts and their homes for the survivors who were willing to talk and for so many who wanted to listen. This is the survivor, and the rest of us are somewhere here. Another example of a grassroots commemorative initiative takes us to the memorial space at the Nova Music Festival site, where 364 people lost their lives, and it has emerged as a powerful mnemonic space for individual mourning and a pilgrimage site for local and international tourists. A top-down commemoration can be seen in a monument initiated and erected by the city of Jerusalem, which commemorates residents of Jerusalem, blending remembrance of October 7 with the war that followed. I suspect that the commemoration of October 7 appeared to be moving towards fragmented model of remembrance. Early indications of this trajectory can already be observed in a dual public memorial service that marked the first 100 days since the attack, each reflecting different perspective and narrative of remembrance. A similar division occurred on the first annual Memorial Day for October 7, when the families of the hostages held their own ceremonies while the government organized a separate event. The evolution of these commemoration practices remain in flux, particularly regarding how the brothers' war memory will interact with or potentially overshadow the troubling and haunting memory of October 7. Time will tell whether an official memorial day will be established for October 7, and if so, when it will take place and in what form. Discussions were initiated at one point and then ended with no legislation has been passed. It's clear that the current government is not interested, and likely the army as well, are not inclined to support such an annual commemoration. Beyond the act of recalling the past, we must ask ourselves, what do we aspire to become? What lessons do we choose to carry forward from our history? The past is not preserved merely for its own sake. It is a compass guiding us to strive as we strive to create a future, one that is better, wiser, and more compassionate. As I write these final words for this talk, Keith Segal, Ofer Calderon meets his 4 kids, and Yarden Bibas are finally back home after close to 500 days in captivity. We are waiting for the list of the 3 men that will hopefully be released by Saturday, so we hope. Though the tunnel has been too long, at least now we can see a glimmer of light at its end, and we hang on to it. Thank you very much for your patience.
Wow, Toda Rabah, thank you so much for such an interesting talk. The culture strand, and the institutionalization strand seem more affected by political changes in administrations. So you mentioned the current administration in Israel. You mentioned the African American History Museum coming during Barack Obama's presidency. And also during Barack Obama's presidency was the first time that memorials to Southern Confederate generals and so on, bases and so on, started to change. So if our cultures in both countries, in the US and in Israel, are in a situation of extreme flux and polarization, how do we, is there a way to, there's no guarantees, right? So do you imagine that there are ways to embed, let's say, viewpoints that reflect maybe the founders' views, if we want to put it that way? Thank you.
Shall we collect a few questions?
Sure, if it's easier for you, that's fine. Yeah.
Let's take another question and then respond.
Yeah.
Hi, is it working? Okay. Thank you. It was very, very interesting. I have a question about the connection between the memory of the Holocaust and the commemoration of October 7th. How do you think that the way the Holocaust is remembered and how significant it is for Israeli, national ethos, and especially, regarding the shift that you talked about with the emphasis towards, victimhood and not heroism. How do you think this affects the way that October 7th was, first of all, experienced, and second of all, commemorated or being commemorated, even, taking testimonies and doing the Zikaron Basalon is a very similar method. And how do you think that affects the way Israelis think about the war or their place in the war that followed?
Okay. First of all, thank you. You actually, I don't think you asked, but you made a comment which I share with you. We are all sort of worried when we get to this extremely polarization. Now, Israel is due to polarization. America had different times where polarization was more visible, less visible. You know, I don't have to tell you, you know about America much more than I will ever be able to learn. And it's a good question, and it's a sad question or a sad comment about current situation. Regarding and if we cannot even remember together or agree on what should be remembered together, we are in a sad place and sympathize with pain and so on and so forth. I want to turn to your question. First of all, I think that when the first time that the Holocaust, you know, the Holocaust play a major role in Israel. No doubt about it. We can say that there also is use and abuse of the Holocaust for political reasons and for other. But the first time the use or the feeling of we are going through a Holocaust came up on October 7. Clear cut. First of all, because there was nothing like that since the Holocaust. You know, when you look at the numbers, when you look at the you know, you can call it pogrom, you can call it whatever you want, but if you listen to the people from that area, from the Otef, they use the word Holocaust. For them, it was a Holocaust. And for us to be so, I would say, defenseless, that nobody came to save them was a totally traumatic. And, you know, when people say from the river to the sea, I said, yes, from the river to the sea, we all need therapy now. Mm-hmm. Now, and then I'll relate to Rabin's commemoration because it was a different challenge. Now, I think that the idea of using the platform of memory in the living room, which is dedicated to the Holocaust, came for the first time only under those. The idea never came up until October 7, because I think that people actually felt that this is sort of the same, and this shouldn't happen to us, because the establishment of the state was supposed to make sure, not that we don't have victims or people are not going to be, you know, dead in wars, but the kind of thing that took place on October 7 was unprecedented, going back to my spouse's first text message. So it was sort of reiterated the Holocaust, and thus this platform came. Now I can share with you some inside stories, because the NGO that is doing this project had a major argument between people who said that they should leave this platform only for the Holocaust. And they were afraid that if we're going to use it for October 7, it's going to overshadow the important memory of the Holocaust. So there was a whole argument, a dispute within the organization, and my position was that the memory of October 7, that the memory of the Holocaust is strong enough to handle it and to be able to include also the memory of October 7, and that it is highly important to narrate the story, because we are at a moment where the government really wish to sort of silence it. And it's important that there will be a bottom up. And in addition, people wanted to share the stories. Survivors wanted to share the stories. So who are we to say that we're not going to give them a platform to do it? You know that one of the arguments following the Holocaust, whether there was silence among Holocaust survivors, and if I quote Chassia Diner and Arlene Stein writing on whether there was a silence, one of the arguments there says that the problem was that many people wanted to narrate the stories, but people didn't want to listen. People didn't want to listen, not because they were bad people, but they just couldn't handle those horrific stories. Here we got to a point where people really wanted to listen, and I can tell you, at least for my house, from my experience, that at a certain point we stopped inviting friends, because after number 60 said that they must come, and there is so much we can put in, fit in the living room, we understood that people really, really wanted to hear testimonies, not through the television or not through other medias that sort of filter the stuff, but just to be sitting with the survivors in the same room. Rabin, you mentioned also Rabin's memory. When Rabin was assassinated, it was such a shock to Israeli society, because unlike the October 7, we had the Holocaust, Rabin, we had no idea where it came from. Nobody ever tried to do something like that. So we actually borrowed from America the words we didn't have. And Naomi Shemer, one of the most, I wouldn't, she was like a poet. She was the most popular songwriter in Israel. What she's doing, she can't find her own words. So she's translating or Captain, My Captain by Walt Whitman. And when you look at that, and this became the song associated with the assassination. When you look at that and you say to yourself, Naomi Shemer needs to translate something? Can she come up with her own words? She couldn't. The same, by the way, goes for those yellow ribbons. First time we're using them. And they come from you guys. I'm sure the history of the yellow ribbon. And I think that it also shows on a moment that we had no idea what to do. So we sort of implement stuff from other cultures and other places.
Hi, thank you so much for your wonderful talk. In the time section of the presentation, you mentioned choosing a day to remember, and you mentioned the tension of Rabin's assassination between November 4th and Yud B'Cheshvan Cheshvan. I wonder, is there any tension on whether to commemorate October 7th on Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah, since it happened on a religious holiday, and especially the complications of celebrating that on a holiday that emphasizes happiness and singing and dancing? And does that play in, do you see that playing into at all the polarization between religious and secular or traditional?
So in America, about 50 years ago, a Jewish community embarked on a huge project to educate our country about the Holocaust. And we've come to realize that that effort, which has gone quite well, Holocaust museums are flourishing here in America, hasn't really helped us deal with the issue of anti-Semitism in America. And the understanding in our country about who Jews are and Jewish history and culture is pretty limited in this country, even in our own community. And efforts that we've had here to build museums and educate people about Jewish history and culture have been impacted a bit by, I'll say, some of the history of anti-Semitism that we've suffered. We don't want to often talk too much about our accomplishments, because our accomplishments are often used as anti-Semitic tropes. And many of the values and principles on which this nation is based, enunciated at our Declaration of Independence, were lifted out of the Hebrew Bible. But we describe this in our country as Judeo-Christian values, with 75% or so of the Christian Bible coming from the Hebrew Bible. So we suppress, if you will, the Jewishness of American values in many ways. So I'm wondering, with all of these challenges that I've presented you, how you might advise us how to better educate ourselves, our children, and our fellow Americans on Jewish history and culture, so that we have a more flourishing life here in America.
Oh, wow. I'll start with fragmentation, potential fragmentation between October 7 and Simchat Torah. It's a problem to mark a Memorial Day on a happy holiday, as if we're not, depressed enough. Taking a happy holiday, Simchat Torah, first of all, would cause an enormous problem for observant Jews. Secular Jews, it's a little bit different when it comes to those holidays. But for observant Jews, and if we want to sort of mark it together, and we're not searching too forcefully to divide, to make more divisions than we already have, probably choosing Simchat Torah is not a good idea, and I don't think it will take place on Simchat Torah. I just don't see it happening. Even for technical reasons, because on all of those high holidays, we keep the public sphere in a religious way, in a way that you cannot have any ceremonies, you cannot have anything official. People can do whatever they want in their private homes, but they cannot do any public ceremony. So I suspect that Simchat Torah is not going to be the day. Choosing October 7 is another problem, because usually the Hebrew calendar, the Israeli calendar does not like to mark stuff on Gregorian dates. And October 7 is a Gregorian date. That, by the way, why Rabin's supporters didn't go for November 4th from the beginning, because they believed that if they will choose Yud Bet Cheshvan, everybody will be with them, which didn't happen. There were other suggestions made somewhere around that area of dates, around Simchat Torah, like 2 days after Simchat Torah. It's not clear. I suspect that October 7 will stick in many people, certainly internationally, and even our right-wing government, which has a major part of ultra-Orthodox partners, agreed this year to mark it on October 7 under the assumption that this is the day that the world remembers. So it's still out there, and the verdict is still out there. Either way is not perfect, and the only thing I can say that I cannot see it happening on Simchat Torah. It's sort of unheard of. Regarding your question, that's a huge one. I don't know how to advise. I barely know how to advise myself on many things, let alone to. But I want to try and give you a serious answer. First of all, I think that way before, anti-Semitism or anti-anything, any other group, education should put an emphasis on respecting everybody, regardless of the group they belong to. And it can be, the Jewish community and any other community. And I think that if human rights education, serious human rights education and civil rights education would be seriously taken, not just here, I would like to have it in Israel as well, we would see much less hatred between groups, because it would be part of the way we should treat people. Sometimes I think that anti-Semitism, together with the decrease in democracy, erosion of democracy, which we see in many countries, Hungary, Poland, Israel, maybe United States, and other, has to do with the fact that the memory of the Holocaust became historical memory rather collective memory. We got far and far away from the Holocaust. Less people who actually were part of that era are among us. And democracies are taken for granted as if we don't need to watch them. Human rights and other rights are taken for granted. We sort of forget what was the source of having all those declarations. Where the Declaration for Human Rights came from, if not from that dark era. And we got sort of away, and the memory and the knowledge about that time became sort of a privileged thing. You know, it took place sometime in the past, and we don't sort of make sure that democracy is strong and that the basic understanding within that system operates, and we sort of let it go as if we don't need to watch it. So I would say that the best thing is serious education in general that sort of lower hatred towards groups in one society. And it could be different groups in different societies. This is the first thought that I would certainly, I'm thinking now about Chad Goldberg, who's a sociologist of Jewish life and of anti-Semitism. He's in Madison. And he sort of follow the history of anti-Semitism in America throughout the years. And his thesis sort of shocked me because he said that throughout the years there was more anti-Semitism than we are willing to admit. And the years in which we didn't feel anti-Semitism here were sort of the exception rather than the rule. I have to say that I was shocked by his, shocked and sad.
So we have time for one more question.
Yeah. So you talk in the agency strand about how a lot of our history is portrayed through film and television. Basically, do you think that there is something kind of problematic with this, and that like it'll reduce very like complex moments of history into things that are a little bit too sanitized?
I don't think there is anything problem. You know, first of all, it's not something we can actually fight. I don't think we can actually fight. This is like, you know, fighting AI or fighting social media. There's stuff that is here, and we better know how to live with it. I think we should pay attention and close attention to this kind of material. And sometimes if we want to reach and tell the story, we need to understand what's the best way to tell a story that is important for us. Now, not always we will have the resources to tell the story. You know, we have to be pretty powerful. Politicians, yes, but politics is not the only thing. It's a very powerful force, but it's not the only power, because culture usually goes deeper than just a specific government here or there. But in general, you know, when we show stuff or when we see stuff, we need to sort of try to understand, who's behind all this? You know, who are the agents of memory? Who plays with that kind of knowledge once it's here? And we have to pay attention to the fact that most people know what they know from popular culture. You know, very few people go in the evening and read a history book that went through all the referees and every footnote has been checked. Very few people. Most people would see something on their whatever, on their cell phone. And we better watch what's going on there. And even when I showed the Anna story thing, there were many controversies if the Holocaust should be told in using this platform. Instagram, other stories, and then you find out that kids, if it's important for us that they will learn something about the Holocaust, the question is how to get to them. What are the right platforms that we wish to use to get and spread the knowledge that we find important?
So with that, will you join me in thanking our wonderful guests?